Starting of chapter 10. Chapter 10 is where we're talking about shapes and circles and rectangles and parallelograms and octagons and all the areas and perimeters of each. So to begin chapter 10, we're talking about the areas of parallelograms and triangles. First, two basic area formulas. If I have an area of a rectangle, it's base times height. Base is always going to create a 90 degrees with the height. And it's the same thing for a parallelogram, but you have to be very careful with a parallelogram because the base always creates the 90-degree angle with the height. So it's the same formula for each, but with a parallelogram, you want to make sure not to use any angle distances. Height is when you're standing straight up and down, so you have to remember base times height, height standing straight up and down. So finding the area of these parallelograms. Now again, when I look at the picture for A, here's my 90-degree angle, so I'm going to do that box first. And the two lengths I should use are the two lengths that help create that 90-degree angle. So this length and this length, that's my base and my height. So in this case, I'm going to have 8 times 10, which is going to give me 80. And my units are inches. And for area, your units are always squared, because you multiplied two numbers together. So that's area is squared. And the second picture is a little bit harder to see. But again, if you trace your box, what you are talking about, those are the two lengths that you should use. So one length would be this length right here. The other length would be this length right here. That's my base and my height. Now this length doesn't have a number, but in a parallelogram, opposite sides are congruent. So this would also be 8 millimeters. And my height here is 12, so it would be 8 times 12, which would give me 96 millimeters squared. Now when I'm dealing with a parallelogram, there's two sets of sides, two opposite sides that are congruent. So really there's two different heights that I could use in the picture. Now if I look at this picture, I'm looking for H. H right here is the height because it helps create a 90-degree angles. This height corresponds with this base right here. So if I had this height, I could figure out what the area is of this parallelogram using that base. The other height that I have is this 90-degree angle. And that would be this height with this base. Now I'm looking for H. And remember that the area for any parallelogram is base times height. Now if I look at my blue base and height, I have both of those lengths. I have 8, because opposite sides are congruent, and 3. So I'm going to find the area of this parallelogram first. 8 times 3 is going to give me 24 units squared. So that's going to be the whole thing. That's the area of this whole shebang. And that's going to help me figure out what H is. Because if I use my other two formulas, or my other two lengths, my height here, or my base here is 4, I'm looking for H. 4 times H now, I know is going to be equal to 24. Why? Because the area is the same. No matter what base and height you use, the area is the same. So if I solve for H, I divide by 4. H is going to be equal to 6 units. Right now I want you to pause the video. Yes, pause the video and attempt B by yourself. So your first step is to figure out which base goes with which height. So my purple base and height is what I did first because both of those have numbers with them. So I figured out that the whole area is equal to 46.8. And I used that to help me figure out my height of my other two side lengths are. Because H times 6.5, since those are the two numbers that help create this 90 degrees, is equal to my area, which is 46.8, and divide by your 6.5. Your answer is 7.2 units. And now we also have triangles, and it's the same concept. When you're talking about base and height, they have to create a 90-degree angle. So when I see this 90 degrees, I can multiply my base times my height. But with a triangle, you have to multiply by 1/2 or divide by 2. That's the same thing. So you first have to figure out which one's your base and height, and then divide by 2 or multiply by 1/2. So the first thing you should always do is look for where is your 90 degrees. So right here is my 90 degrees. So here's my whole base. And you should always just use the solid line when you're talking about a triangle. The solid line is your only base. And here's my height. So in this case, I have to add up the 5 plus 8. So that would be 13 feet. That's my whole base. So I have 6 times 13 divided by 2. Or you could write it out as 1/2 times 6 times 13. Either way, you're going to get the same answer, which would be 39 feet squared. 39 feet squared. Now the second problem is here to mess you up. Here's my 90 degrees. So this right here is going to be my height. This is the only base that I use. You only use the length that's actually in your picture. So in this case, this 2 does not matter. This 2 is there to screw you up. So don't let it do it. So it's going to be 1/2 times my base times my height, which would give me 19.25 inches squared. Right now I want you to pause the video and attempt the last one by yourself. You should have gotten 27 yards squared. Again, here's my 90 degrees, so that will give you your base and height. And my last problem that I'm doing is compound figures. So whenever you have a compound figure, you should cut it up into smaller units or smaller shapes. So in this shape, I have 2 figures. I have a rectangle and I have a triangle. My rectangle is going to be 5 times 12. That's my rectangle, because it's just base times height, which is going to give me 60. And then I look at my triangle. Remember, triangle is going to be 1/2 times base times height. So I have to figure out what's my base and what's my height. Well, this length right here is going to be 5 because opposite are congruent in a rectangle. If this whole thing is 16, the distance from this length to the tip of my triangle is going to give me 4. So that's going to create a 90-degree angle there. So that would be my 5 and 4 would be my base and height. So that's going to give me 10. And when I add those up, I would get 70, and my units are centimeters squared. So for my second problem, again, you have to make sure to cut it into 2 different pictures. My first picture I have here is a parallelogram. So if I find this parallelogram, here's a 90 degrees. I should always use that. So here would be my height, and the length here in my picture, this would be my base, because those are the 2 lengths that make my height and base. So in this case, for the parallelogram, my height here is going to be 18, my base is going to give me 40, because again, you only use the length inside your picture, and opposite sides are congruent. And that's going to give me 720. And then I look at, here's my triangle, and I'm going to use the same 90-degree angle. Here's my 90 degrees. So here's my height, and this now is my base. Again, only the part that's actually part of your shape. So for my triangle, it's going to be 1/2 times my height times my base. And that would give me 450 degrees. And then you add them up because they're combined together. So my final answer here would be 1,170. My units are meters, and I'm talking about area, so it's going to be squared. Make sure you took good notes, and you know what? Have a great day.